The air in the Everglades was thick and heavy, saturated with the damp scent of cypress trees and the faint buzz of insects. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the dense mangroves, turning the water's surface into a mirror of gold and crimson. It should have been a moment of tranquility, a reminder of the beauty that still thrived in the wild, but tonight, it was anything but peaceful. John Miller adjusted his binoculars, his sharp eyes narrowing as he spotted movement in the distance. A group of men in dark clothing, armed with rifles and machetes, moved silently through the underbrush like ghosts. Beside him, his 12-year-old daughter, Emma, crouched low, her chestnut hair tucked under a baseball cap. She was supposed to stay at the research station, but Emma had convinced John to let her accompany him on this survey. Now he regretted that decision. "Stay low, Em," John whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. His heart pounded as he watched the men approach a towering banyan tree, where a family of golden-cheeked gibbons had made their home. "Don't make a sound." Emma's wide brown eyes flickered with fear and determination. She clutched the camera John had given her, but her hands trembled too much to use it. "Dad, they're going after the gibbons," she whispered, her voice breaking. John nodded grimly. He'd been tracking these poachers for months, gathering evidence of their illegal operations. But this was the first time he'd come face to face with them. The leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with cold, calculating eyes, gestured to his crew. John recognized him immediately: Victor Kane, a name that sent chills down the spine of anyone involved in conservation. Kane was a mastermind of wildlife trafficking, known for his brutality and untouchable reputation. "They're just animals," one of the men muttered, raising his rifle. The first shot shattered the air, sending the gibbons into a frenzy of screams and hoots. Emma flinched, tears welling up in her eyes as she watched the family scatter. A mother gibbon clutched her baby, leaping from branch to branch, but the hunters were relentless. Another shot rang out, and the mother's body plummeted to the ground. The baby, barely clinging to her lifeless form, wailed in despair. "No." Emma's voice was a whisper, but it carried all the anguish of a scream. John placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his jaw tight. "We can't do anything right now. It's too dangerous." His own voice shook with anger and helplessness. He hated himself for his inaction, but he knew that stepping in would only put them both in jeopardy. The poachers continued their grisly work, capturing 2 young gibbons that had survived the slaughter. The leader, Victor, smirked as he barked orders to his men. "Bag them and let's move. We've got buyers waiting." John bit his lip so hard it drew blood. He memorized every detail: the men's faces, their weapons, the license plate of their truck. This wasn't the end. He would make sure of that. The drive back to the Miami Zoo's research station was silent, except for the occasional sniffle from Emma. She clutched the camera tightly, her knuckles white. The images she had captured, blurry, chaotic, but damning, would haunt her for a long time. "Dad, we have to save them," Emma said finally, her voice trembling but resolute. "The babies, they need us." John glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his heart breaking at the sight of her tear-streaked face. "We will, Em, I promise. But we have to be smart about it. If we go after them without evidence, we'll lose." When they arrived at the station, John immediately contacted his colleague, Rachel Carter, a fearless environmental journalist who had spent years exposing corruption and illegal wildlife trade. Rachel arrived within the hour, her dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail and her laptop in hand. "Let me guess," she said, scanning the photos Emma had taken. "Victor Kane. He's like a cockroach, always crawling out of the cracks. No matter how many times we try to stomp him." John nodded. "He's escalating. This wasn't just opportunistic hunting, he's building a network. And the local authorities?" He shook his head. "They're either incompetent or complicit." Rachel's jaw tightened. "Then we'll do what we always do, expose him. But this time, we're going to need more than photos. We need testimony, names, and a paper trail." 2 days later, word came from a local informant that the surviving gibbons, a pair of young males, had been sold to a dealer in Miami. John, Rachel, and Emma acted quickly, coordinating with a small team of trusted allies. The rescue operation was dangerous and required them to navigate a web of black market dealers, bribes, and false leads. When they finally located the gibbons, Emma was the first to see them. The two were huddled together in a filthy cage, their golden fur matted and their eyes wide with fear. Emma's heart broke all over again as she crouched beside the cage. "Hey there," she whispered softly, extending her hand. "You're safe now. I'm going to take you home." The younger of the two, barely more than a baby, reached out tentatively, his tiny fingers brushing against hers. Emma smiled through her tears. "I think I'll call you Sonny." "And you," she said, looking at the older one, whose cautious eyes darted around the room. "Will be Shadow." John and Rachel exchanged a glance, both moved by Emma's determination. In that moment, John knew that his daughter wasn't just a child caught up in something far bigger than her. She was a force to be reckoned with. And together, they would take on Victor Kane and his empire of cruelty. The two Gibbons, Sonny and Shadow, huddled together in the corner of their temporary enclosure at the Miami Zoo's Rehabilitation Center. Their wide eyes reflected the trauma they had endured. But there was also a flicker of curiosity, a glimmer of hope that had not yet been extinguished. Emma sat cross-legged outside their enclosure, sketching their delicate forms in her notebook. It was her way of connecting with them, of trying to understand their world. "Sonny's eating," Emma whispered excitedly to her father, who was reviewing notes with Rachel nearby. John looked up and smiled faintly, his exhaustion evident. Sonny, the smaller of the two, was cautiously nibbling on a piece of fruit Emma had left near the bars. Shadow, however, remained withdrawn, his gaze fixed on a distant point as though willing himself to be somewhere else. "That's progress," John said, though his tone was more subdued than celebratory. "But we have a long way to go." Rachel set down her laptop and joined them. "They're survivors, John. With the right care, they'll heal." Her voice was firm but gentle, the kind of reassurance they all needed. Outside the zoo, the atmosphere was far less hopeful. A group of protesters had gathered, holding signs that read, "Protect our jobs," and "Stop prioritizing animals over people." The tension in the community had been building ever since news of the Gibbons rescue broke. Many locals, struggling to make ends meet, saw the poaching trade as a necessary evil, a source of income that kept food on their tables. Sheriff Harvey Trent stood near the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed over his chest. He'd made it clear to John that his office had no resources to dedicate to "a couple of monkeys," as he dismissively put it. But Trent's reluctance ran deeper than that. Rumors swirled about his connections to Victor Kane's network, though nothing had ever been proven. Emma and Rachel watched the scene from the zoo's observation deck. "Why do they hate us so much?" Emma asked, her voice heavy with frustration. "Don't they care about what happened to Sonny and Shadow?" Rachel sighed, her expression thoughtful. "It's not that simple, Em. For a lot of these people, it's about survival. When you're struggling to feed your family, it's hard to see the bigger picture. But that doesn't make it right," Emma insisted, her fists clenched. "No, it doesn't," Rachel agreed, "and that's why we have to show them a different way." Later that evening, John received a tip from an anonymous source. The message was brief but intriguing, evidence of Kane's network. Everglades warehouse. Midnight. Rachel was immediately skeptical. "It's too convenient," she said, pacing the small office they used as a command center. "Why now? And why tell us?" "Because maybe someone on the inside wants out," John replied. He was tired of second-guessing every lead. They needed a breakthrough, and they needed it fast. Emma, who had been quietly listening from the corner, spoke up. "We have to go. If it's a trap, we'll be careful. But what if it's not? What if it's the evidence we need?" John hesitated. The thought of bringing Emma into danger made his stomach churn. But he also knew how determined she was. "You're not coming," he said firmly. "Rachel and I will check it out. You stay here with the Gibbons." The Everglades at night were a different world. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows on the ground. John and Rachel parked their Jeep a mile away from the warehouse and continued on foot, their flashlights barely piercing the darkness. The warehouse was a decrepit structure hidden deep within the swamp. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and gasoline. As they approached, they spotted movement inside. Through a cracked window, they saw men loading crates into an unmarked truck. The faint cries of animals came from within the crates, and John's stomach turned. "This is it," he whispered. He pulled out his camera and began snapping photos, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Rachel crouched beside him, her voice low. "We need more than pictures. We need to know where they're taking those animals." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind them made them freeze. They turned to find themselves face to face with a man holding a shotgun. His smirk was unmistakable. "Victor Kane, you really should learn to mind your own business." "John," Kane said, his tone almost conversational. "But since you're here, why don't you come inside? We've got plenty to discuss." John and Rachel were forced into the warehouse, their hands tied behind their backs. Kane's men circled them like vultures, their expressions a mix of amusement and menace. "You think you're heroes, don't you?" Kane sneered. "But you're just pests. And pests get exterminated." Before Kane could make good on his threat, a deafening crash echoed through the building. One of the crates had toppled over, its contents spilling onto the floor. A terrified ocelot darted out, sowing chaos among the men. In the confusion, Rachel managed to cut her bindings on a jagged piece of metal. "Run," she shouted, grabbing John's arm. They bolted for the exit, dodging gunfire and shouting men. The swamp became their ally, its dense vegetation swallowing them whole as they fled into the night. Breathless and battered, they finally reached the jeep. John looked back at the warehouse, now barely visible through the trees. "We'll get him," he said, his voice a mixture of determination and fury. "No matter what it takes." The sun rose over Miami the next morning, but the light brought little comfort to John, Rachel, and Emma. The events of the previous night had left them shaken but determined. As they regrouped in their makeshift command center at the zoo, their focus shifted to the evidence they had managed to gather. "We've got the photos," Rachel said, spreading the prints across the table. "Crates, men, license plates. It's a start, but it's not enough to take Kane down." John leaned over the table, his face lined with exhaustion. "We need a direct link between Kane and the buyers. Something that proves he's running the entire network, not just operating in the Everglades." Emma, sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "What about the animals in the crates? Can we track them? Find out where they're being sent?" Rachel's eyes lit up. "That's a good idea, Emma. If we can figure out the transport routes, it might lead us to the buyers and more evidence." Using the license plates from the photos, Rachel made a few discreet calls to her contacts in law enforcement and animal welfare organizations. One lead pointed to a shipping company in the industrial district of Miami, known for its shady practices. "I've got a name," Rachel announced. "Evergreen Logistics. They've been flagged before for questionable cargo, but nothing's ever stuck. I'll bet they're moving Kane's animals." John nodded. "Then that's where we start. Emma, I need you to stay here. This could get dangerous." Emma's face fell, but she didn't argue. Instead, she turned her attention back to Sunny and Shadow, who were slowly starting to trust their new environment. "Be safe," she said quietly. That evening, John and Rachel staked out the Evergreen Logistics warehouse. The area was a maze of shipping containers and trucks, with workers loading and unloading crates under the dim glow of floodlights. Rachel adjusted the zoom on her camera, snapping pictures of everything she could. "There," John whispered, pointing to a truck with the same license plate they'd seen in the Everglades. "That's our truck." They watched as workers loaded several large crates into the truck. The faint sound of animal cries reached their ears, confirming their suspicions. Rachel's jaw tightened. "We need to follow that truck." The truck pulled out of the warehouse, and John and Rachel followed at a safe distance. Their hearts pounded as the vehicle wound its way through the city, finally stopping at a secluded mansion on the outskirts of Miami. Guards stood at the gate, and luxury cars lined the driveway. "Looks like a buyer's auction," Rachel muttered, snapping more photos. "If we can prove Kane's here, it'll tie him directly to the trade." As they crept closer to get a better view, a guard spotted them. "Hey, you," he shouted, reaching for his radio. John and Rachel bolted, ducking behind trees and fences as more guards joined the chase. They managed to lose their pursuers, but Rachel's camera was damaged in the chaos. "Damn it," she hissed, inspecting the broken lens. "We've got to go back. We need those photos." "Not tonight," John said firmly. "We've pushed our luck far enough. Let's regroup and come up with a new plan." Back at the zoo, Emma was waiting anxiously. When John and Rachel walked in, bruised and exhausted, she ran to them. "What happened? Did you get what we need?" Rachel shook her head. "Not yet, but we're close. We know where the buyers are meeting, and we've got enough to keep digging." Emma's brow furrowed. "What if you had someone on the inside? Someone who could act like they were part of the trade?" John and Rachel exchanged a glance. That's risky, John said, but it might be our best shot. The next day, Rachel contacted an old source, Luis Delgado, a former poacher who had turned whistleblower after seeing the devastating effects of his actions. Luis had connections in Kane's network and a reputation that could get him into the auction. Luis arrived at the zoo that afternoon, a wiry man with weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much. He looked at Sunny and Shadow, his expression softening. "They're lucky to have you," he said to Emma. "I've done things I'm not proud of, but maybe this is my chance to make it right." Luis agreed to infiltrate the auction, wearing a hidden camera to gather evidence. "If I'm caught, it's over for me," he warned. "We'll have your back," Rachel promised. The plan was simple but dangerous. Luis would attend the auction, posing as a buyer interested in exotic animals. Meanwhile, John and Rachel would monitor from a nearby location, ready to alert the authorities if things went wrong. As night fell, the tension was palpable. Emma stayed behind, watching the live feed from Luis's camera. Her heart raced as she saw the opulence of the mansion, the cages filled with terrified animals, and the shadowy figures of wealthy buyers. Then, Victor Kane appeared. Luis's camera captured every detail: Kane's confident stride, his smug smile, and his interactions with the buyers. It was the evidence they needed. But just as Luis was about to leave, Kane's sharp eyes landed on him. "You're new," Kane said, his tone casual but his gaze piercing. "Who invited you?" Luis hesitated, searching for an answer. Emma held her breath, watching the screen. "I've got connections in South America," Luis said smoothly. "Thought I'd see what you have to offer." Kane's smile returned, but his suspicion lingered. "Enjoy the auction," he said. Before walking away, Luis managed to leave the mansion with his cover intact, bringing back invaluable footage. The next morning, Rachel sent the evidence to her contacts in federal law enforcement. Within hours, a task force was mobilized to raid the mansion. The raid was swift and decisive. Dozens of animals were rescued, and several buyers were arrested. But Victor Kane was nowhere to be found. The arrest of several key buyers during the raid sent shockwaves through Miami and beyond. News channels covered the story non-stop, showing images of the animals rescued from Victor Kane's operation and the luxury mansion where the auction had been held. But the man at the center of it all, Victor Kane, remained elusive, a phantom shadowing their every move. In the weeks that followed, the Miller family, Rachel, and Luis Delgado worked tirelessly to piece together the web of evidence against Kane. Emma found herself increasingly involved, helping catalog photos and video footage, and even joining Rachel in interviews to raise public awareness about the dangers of wildlife trafficking. "It's not just about the animals," Emma said during one televised interview. Her young voice carried surprising strength and conviction. "It's about protecting our planet and standing up against people who think they can destroy it for profit." Her words struck a chord with viewers, rallying public support for their cause. Despite the growing mountain of evidence, the case against Kane was far from airtight. His legal team, a cadre of expensive attorneys, worked tirelessly to discredit witnesses and suppress evidence. Court hearings became battlegrounds where Kane's lawyers argued that their client was being targeted unfairly. A victim of sensationalized media narratives. "He's playing the system," Rachel fumed one evening, slamming her laptop shut. "Every delay, every technicality, it's all designed to make us lose momentum." Luis nodded grimly. "Kane's done this before. He knows how to cover his tracks." But Emma refused to give up hope. "We just need to find something he can't explain away," she said, "something that proves he's behind everything." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Rachel received a call from Lila Kane, Victor's estranged younger sister. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I know what my brother has done," she said, "and I can help you stop him." The team met with Lila in a secure location, a soft-spoken woman in her mid-30s. She carried an air of quiet determination. "Victor wasn't always like this," Lila began. "When we were kids, he loved animals. But after our parents died, he changed. He started seeing the world as something to exploit, not protect." She handed over a USB drive. "These are records from his private accounts. Payments, shipments, client lists. It's everything you need to tie him to the trafficking ring." John hesitated. "Why now? Why are you doing this?" Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Because I've been running from him my whole life. It's time I stopped." With Lila's evidence, The prosecution's case against Kane gained undeniable weight. The trial began in a packed Miami courthouse, drawing international attention. Protesters gathered outside, some demanding justice for the animals, others defending Kane as a scapegoat for larger systemic issues. Inside, the courtroom crackled with tension. Kane's lawyers argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that Lila's testimony was motivated by personal vendetta. But the prosecution, led by a fiery young attorney named Maya Patel, methodically dismantled their arguments. The evidence speaks for itself. Maya declared during her closing argument, "This isn't just about Victor Kane. It's about the countless animals that have suffered, the ecosystems destroyed, and the people who have been silenced. Today, we say enough." Emma, sitting in the gallery beside her father, felt a surge of pride and hope. She had spent weeks preparing to testify about the impact of poaching and the importance of conservation. When her turn came, she took the stand with a calm resolve that belied her age. "When I look at Sunny and Shadow," she said, her voice steady, "I see what we're fighting for. They're not just animals, they're survivors, and they deserve a world where they don't have to run from people like Victor Kane." After days of testimony, the jury reached a decision. The room fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. On the charges of wildlife trafficking, conspiracy, and corruption, we find the defendant, Victor Kane, guilty. The gallery erupted in cheers and tears. Kane's smug demeanor finally cracked, his face twisting in anger and disbelief as he was led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, Emma, John, Rachel, and Luis embraced, their victory tempered by the knowledge that the fight for conservation was far from over. The trial's outcome sent a clear message. Authorities across the country began cracking down on wildlife trafficking. Inspired by the Miller family's unwavering determination, the Miami Zoo received increased funding for its conservation programs, allowing Sunny and Shadow to thrive in a new sanctuary designed to mimic their natural habitat. Emma became a local hero, her story inspiring others to take up the cause. She often visited Sunny and Shadow, finding comfort and strength in their resilience. "This is just the beginning," she told her father one evening as they watched the gibbons play. "We have so much more work to do." John smiled, his pride evident, "And we'll do it together." The Miami skyline shimmered in the early morning light as Emma and John stood together on the observation deck of the zoo's new conservation wing. Below them, Sunny and Shadow swung playfully between the branches of a carefully designed habitat that mimicked their natural environment. The air was filled with the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot from the gibbons, a stark contrast to the chaos that had surrounded them just months ago. "They look happy," Emma said softly, her eyes fixed on Sunny as he reached for a piece of fruit dangling from a rope. John nodded. "They are, and they're safe, because of you." Emma smiled, but her thoughts were already turning to the future. "We did this, but there are so many others who still need help. This can't be the end." John placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not. It's just the beginning." The trial of Victor Kane had brought international attention to the plight of endangered animals and the devastating effects of wildlife trafficking. Donations poured into the Miami Zoo's conservation program, allowing John and his team to expand their efforts. Rachel Carter's exposé on the case won several journalism awards and spurred new legislation aimed at cracking down on poaching and trafficking networks. She continued to work closely with the Millers, using her platform to advocate for stronger protections for endangered species. One of the most significant developments was the establishment of the Wildlife Justice Alliance, a coalition of conservationists, legal experts, and law enforcement dedicated to dismantling trafficking networks. Luis Delgado became a key member, using his insider knowledge to help track and expose poachers around the globe. Sunny and Shadow's recovery marked a turning point not just for them but for everyone involved. After months of rehabilitation, they were ready to return to the wild. The decision was bittersweet for Emma, who had grown deeply attached to the gibbons. The release took place in a protected reserve in Southeast Asia, where the species had originally thrived. Emma and John traveled with them, ensuring they were safely reintroduced to their natural habitat. Standing in the lush forest, Emma watched as Sunny and Shadow climbed into the canopy, their golden fur catching the sunlight. "Goodbye, Sunny. Goodbye, Shadow," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to fight for something bigger than myself." Emma's journey resonated far beyond the confines of Miami. Her story became a rallying cry for young activists around the world, proving that age was no barrier to making a difference. She began speaking at schools and community events, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to take action. Protecting the environment isn't just a job for scientists or politicians, she said during one event. It's something we all have to do together, because every choice we make, every action we take, can create a ripple that changes the world. Her words sparked a wave of grassroots initiatives. From local cleanup drives to campaigns against illegal wildlife trade, the movement she inspired grew rapidly, connecting people from all walks of life in a shared mission to protect the planet. Years later, Emma returned to the Everglades, now a thriving symbol of conservation and resilience. The swamp that had once been a battleground was now a sanctuary, its waters teeming with life. Sunny and Shadow had become legends, their story a testament to the power of compassion and determination. As Emma walked along the boardwalk, she spotted a group of children on a guided tour, their eyes wide with wonder as they learned about the animals and ecosystems of the Everglades. She smiled, knowing that the seeds she had planted were continuing to grow. John joined her, his hair now streaked with gray but his spirit as strong as ever. "You've done good, kid," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm proud of you." Emma looked out over the water, her heart full of hope. "I'm proud of all of us. But there's still so much to do." John nodded. "And we'll keep doing it, one step at a time." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Everglades in hues of gold and purple, Emma felt a sense of peace. The fight was far from over. But for the first time, she knew, deep in her soul, that they were making a difference. Together, they were building a future worth fighting for.